Hi everyone, and welcome to my home. I'm Antonio Zappulla, the CEO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Every November we host the Trust Conference. It's a global human rights forum bringing together more than 600 people from 60 countries around the world to discuss the most pressing human rights issues, from media freedom to climate to social justice. With so much uncertainty ahead of us, we decided to put the Trust Conference on hold this year and bring you the content straight into your phones. I'll be talking to thought leaders and change makers looking at how the coronavirus crisis is affecting our lives, our planet, our societies, and our freedoms. Today's topic is media freedom, and at risk of stating the obvious, you simply cannot fight a global pandemic without accurate information. To discuss all this, let's bring in our first guest. Is Joel Simon, the Executive Director of CPJ, global organization working to protect and defend media freedom and the rights of journalists around the world. Hey, Joel, thank you for your time. How's your quarantine going?
I consider myself fortunate. I'm here with my family. I have two teenage daughters, and so the big problem is fighting over space in our Brooklyn apartment and bandwidth.
Well, let's hope the bandwidth will be good during the course of this interview.
Yeah, no promises.
All right, fingers crossed. I guess my first question is, can you help us understand the connection between the pandemic and the risk to media freedom?
Well, I think the starting point is recognizing that information is a critical resource in fighting the pandemic. And this has been framed by the WHO and others in some ways as combating misinformation. But that's only one part of the broader challenge. What we need is an environment in which journalists can work freely. And there are a number of critical reasons why this is important. People around the world need accurate and timely information in order to make informed decisions that are literally a matter of life and death. And journalism and a free media is the best way to achieve that. The second reason is that governments and other institutions around the world are making critical decisions that have a profound impact on our lives. And we need journalists to hold them accountable.
And so where are you witnessing the worst forms of abuse, the most worrying cases? Are we really talking about the usual suspects here?
Not at all. I've called this the COVID crackdown. And in many ways, it's unprecedented. And for a couple of reasons. One is because of the scale. It's literally happening everywhere in the world. So that is something I've really never seen. And the other thing that is so alarming is that repressive governments around the world are opportunistic. They're threatened by independent information, and they're always looking for a rationale and a framework to crack down. But this is an ideal framework to justify repressive action because they have some legitimate concern. And the other thing to keep in mind, Antonio, that's so important is that censorship in one country is censorship everywhere. So when China, for example, cracks down, as they've done, on the work of journalists and other independent observers who are trying to document the government's response to COVID-19 or lack of response in some instances, at least in the initial phases, that has an impact on global understanding, on global policies, on global response. So this is not a question of national sovereignty. This is a global issue, and we need to find global solutions to these problems.
And what kind of tactics have you seen being deployed to silence the press?
In Hungary, where Viktor Orban has basically proposed the Hungarian parliament that new laws be put on the books criminalizing what is deemed to be fake news, which is basically a rubric for the prime minister to further restrict the circulation of independent information and ideas. In India, you've seen Prime Minister Modi basically make the argument that it should be the government that determines what is accurate information and not. And he actually tried to argue that the Indian court should enforce this rubric. Luckily, the Supreme Court pushed back against that, so that did not move forward, but it's certainly a very dangerous idea. And then in countries that are democratic in the heart of Europe, where they are living or have been living with very serious public health emergencies, like Spain and Italy. We've seen just overzealous police, for example, restrict the ability of journalists to just move freely and access information that's essential for keeping the public informed.
And so are we basically talking about a unique moment in time here?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've never lived through an experience like this. I mean, I think China is essentially making an argument that their ability to stem the spread of the disease within China is based on an authoritarian system that includes control and management of information. And then they're pointing around the world to places like Europe and the UK and the United States and saying, look what happens in these democratic countries. It's messy. The government doesn't have the ability to manage the response appropriately and to control information. And really, we need global leaders to push back against that framing, and we don't have them.
You talk about global leadership. What about the public? Is the public aware of this risk, what's unfolding? And if the public is aware, what can they do to stop a pandemic becoming an excuse to curtail democratic freedoms?
If you've ever lived or spent time in an environment in which information is controlled and managed, one of the consequences of that is you don't know what you don't know. Now, in countries around the world that are more open and more democratic, I think there are a couple of dynamics that are very dangerous. One is on an individual and personal level, people have accepted the authority of the state to take unprecedented action to curtail their liberties in order to fight the pandemic. So they're being told to stay at home, they stay at home. They're being told limit their social interactions, and they're doing that. And they understand the value. And then the third point is there's a dynamic that functions in normal times between countries that have a more democratic tradition and countries that are more authoritarian. So if you are, Egypt, and you're cracking down on the spread of COVID-19 inside of Egypt, you're not facing any international pressure. If you are Brazil, where President Bolsonaro is acting in the most erratic and irrational way, in a way that jeopardizes the health of his own people, he is not facing any pressure. So you put those three dynamics into play, and we are at a point where the public is not sufficiently engaged, and these basic essential rights are slipping away. At a minimum, I think people need to be aware of what's at stake here, and that the inevitable compromises that we have to make to fight a disease can't include our democratic rights, can't include our civil liberties, can't include the most essential protections that allow for the functioning of a free press.
Well, let's hope this will contribute in raising awareness globally. Joel, thank you for your time. Good luck with the terrific work that you guys do at CPJ. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's wonderful to speak with you.
Well, that's all for this time. I'll be announcing our next speakers on my Twitter account at Anto Zappulla and the Trust Conference Twitter account at TrustConf. Also, don't forget to like the Trust Conference YouTube page and to tweet us your questions. We really want to hear from you and put those questions to our next speakers. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time.